Hey there, welcome back to No Pants Profits. My name is Richard, and today I'm coming to you from the IAPA Expo at the Orange County Convention Center to bring you the full future of cruise line destinations. Now, this is going to focus, I believe, mostly on Carnival and Celebration Key. The only cruise line representative is the Director of Development from Carnival, but they've got a bunch of other people that are going to weigh in on cruise line destinations. So I'm going to bring you the entire conference, the entire presentation, which is going to be about an hour. I hope to ask some questions at the end. So I'm going to tamper my Carnival hate for a bit and at least hear what they have to say. But I do have a question that the founding fathers would say. You know, as you get these new destinations, they want to tax Americans. These destinations are very much cash destinations. So what is taxation without representation? Well, it's tyranny. I'd rather go out, spend a taxi cab, and pay cash and not pay tax than pay tax on a cruise line's private island. That's just me. I've got that question, but enjoy this little glimpse at how Carnival and industry experts think that private destinations are going to change here from the International Attractions and Amusements Expo 2025 at the Orange County Convention Center in Orlando, Florida. Enjoy.
And our silver sponsors, Brookfield Properties, Disney Live Entertainment, and SNS Worldwide.
Next, we invite any members of the media to please identify yourself by raising your hand at this time. Thank you.
Translation services for this session are provided by Wordly. To access translations, log into the IAPA Connect Plus app. Open the session details and select the AI Translations button.
Near the end of today's presentation, tablets will be passed around with an evaluation regarding today's session. Please complete an evaluation, then pass the tablet to the person sitting next to you. IAPA thanks our partners at ABS for providing the technology for today's evaluations.
Now sit back,
relax,
and be inspired by today's presentation.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Hopefully this clicks up. I'm Josh Martin. This thing is jumping. All right, we're on the right thing. I'm Josh Martin. I'm President Creative Director of Martin Aquatic. I am honored to moderate a panel today here on the future of experiential cruise design. I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves before we get going. Start with Keith.
Hey, good morning. Thank you guys for coming out. My name is Keith Carr. I'm the Vice President of Global Development for Carnival Cruise Line. I see a lot of familiar faces and some new ones, so thanks again. If you guys want to chat afterwards, I'm very open to making new relationships here at IAPA. Background about me, I'm a contractor by trade. I did about 15 years as a general contractor, building everything from nanoscale research facilities to strip malls. Before I got dragged into the world of themed entertainment, I did a decade with Merlin Entertainment. I see some Merlin alums here, which is great to see. And then I was brought over to the dark side of cruises because we saw a huge opportunity of being able to take an industry that is wonderful for guest immersion on the ships and elevating that to what the land side needs to be to really draw people in for these short break destinations. So I've been there for a little over 3 years. We'll talk more about some of the projects we delivered. So thank you. Scott.
All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm Scott Lamont. I'm the CEO of EDSA. We are planners and landscape architects. We have a global practice with a strong focus and emphasis around hospitality. And we are in this fine group today because we have seen the blurring of the lines between the hospitality industry and the land destinations. And we are increasingly being called on to bring that experience to the landside destinations. Prior to serving as CEO, I led a design studio for about 15 years, working globally on resort destinations around the world.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Leon Camarda with Project Management Advisors. We're a project management consultancy. We do a lot of work in the hospitality space. Some of the projects we'll see today, we've been a part of. My background's in development and construction.
Thank you. Well, thank you everybody for coming this morning. Obviously, we are the counter programming to the opening session, so we appreciate you being here. As we jump into it today, we're going to start with, quite frankly, the biggest launch of the year. Keith, you were involved in a small project. We actually have a video queued up just to give everybody a feel of what Carnival Celebration Key is. They did not give us audio. Do you want to narrate the video then, since we have no audio?
We always ad-lib, my friend. So yeah, small development, as you said, $660 million investment on the island of Grand Bahama in the Bahamas. Very unique destination. It's kind of our big jump into what we're calling our private destinations, rebranding of our private destinations. We have developed about 75 acres of guest experience. It's broken up into 5 portals, as we call them. So our arrivals portal in Paradise Plaza, you'll see it anchored by our large, iconic sun castle. It stands about 150 feet tall with 2 racing slides that dive into our large lagoons. It's kind of our big calling point here that we worked closely with Mr. Martin on, 7-acre lagoon, which is the Caribbean's largest and the largest in the cruise industry, to really drive into something that's unique with its amenities. We have 22 restaurants and bars, the world's largest smoke bar at Long Neckers, which is on our adult side. We've kind of broken up the experiences to let guests kind of choose how they want to experience Celebration Key. So families will tend to migrate over to Calypso Cove, Starfish Lagoon, while the adults will tend to migrate over to Calypso Cove. We have an exclusive adults-only beach club called Pearl Cove as well, and then a lot of upscale retail in Lagunas Cove. So, a beautiful attraction, lots and lots of fun things to explore.
That's great. For those of you in the room who aren't familiar, just kind of wanted to give a lay of the land of what's happening in the cruise space right now. So, as Keith said, a lot of these cruise lines have had private destinations. Norwegian actually opened the first one in 1977. Royal Caribbean came along in 1986, Carnival in 1997, but it was really back in, we'll call it 2019, where Royal Caribbean launched Perfect Day at Coco Cay, and I think that started to change the mentality of what we're seeing in these private destinations. And so for us, a little bit of history for those of you that aren't aware, this map, I'll say, shows what is known right now. I think all of us on the stage can say there's a lot more coming, and we'll talk about that and we'll look through that. So as we go from there, Scott, oh yeah.
If I could add, I just want to note, the map that we're showing here is representative of what we're all familiar with in the Caribbean, of course, but this truly is a global phenomenon, right? It is happening along, in the Red Sea, in the Middle East, new cruise corridors opening up within Asia. I mean, this is the leading edge of the industry right here, but it is something that is spreading worldwide.
Scott, that's a great question. I'm gonna kind of jump to you here. Obviously, all-inclusive resorts have been around for decades. As a land planner and working on that, how would you say we've started to see the changes of these cruise lines now trying to offer that resort experience? What are you guys seeing in development?
The all-inclusives, the original AI, right? They are definitely have been tapped into this kind of dynamic for a number of years. And the trends that we're seeing in the all-inclusive world are starting to parallel what we're seeing in the cruise industry, particularly a higher level service, a higher level of delivery, which we're going to talk a lot about today, of experience, right? You want the opportunity to come in, make that decision to be at a certain destination, and really explore and enjoy your entire trip and your entire visit. That philosophy has been picked up and brought into these cruise ports and the cruise destinations. And increasingly now you see groups like Sandals, elevating their game around that performance. And I think it's just, it's beginning to become that little bit of an arms race. But I don't think it stops at all-inclusives. I think it's generally speaking in hospitality and resorts. What's driving that industry right now are some of the similar trends that we're going to talk about today.
No, that's fantastic. Obviously, for those in the room, real quick, who's been on a cruise in the room? Okay, fair amount. Let's go Florida. So every cruise line has different offerings. Every island has different offerings of what's included, not included. Keith, how do you guys kind of make some of the decisions at Celebration Key of what would be for free, what would be for pay? What was kind of some of the driving factors there?
Just before, I think Scott made a great point in terms of this all-inclusive model and why I think people are interested in cruises. But what we see from our guest demographic is it's a mix of two, right? So you kind of get that speed dating of what we want to call curated, authentic experiences in a safe manner, beautiful locations where you can go out and experience the local culture, spend a day exploring, doing short excursions, and get back onto our all-inclusive resort, which is on the cruise ships, right? And I think that's what really is drawing people in terms of value for money, where you don't have to dedicate a stay for a week in Sandals in Jamaica. You can do Jamaica and other ports as well to figure out what you really like. And I think that's what really gets people into cruising initially. And the ships have been phenomenal, and as you said, what we're really pushing on is how do we make this into a short break, right? The ships become our hotels, our destinations become the resort amenities, and that's really what our customers are asking for. So, leading to your question, that's what we see from what our guests want, and it really depends on our brand. So, everyone assumes that Carnival is Carnival Cruise Line, but we actually own a lot of different cruise lines that range from family-friendly, which is Carnival, all the way up to our most exclusive luxury, which is Seaboard. And every guest demographic has a different want and need, whether it be curated experience in culinary. We have our active silvers on Holland that want to get out and bike ride and do yoga on the beaches, to Carnival Cruise Line, which is for multi-generations. And that's really what we try to focus on from corporate is how do we develop something that is multifaceted, that touches all of our brands, that at least allows zones and areas that are curated for them to feel like we're actually listening to the guest needs. So it really comes back into a lot of initial market research. We do a ton of it. Teasing ideas, doing focus groups, really trying to figure out what moves the dial and what's going to give that intent to visit. And then corporate really relies on us. How do we overlay that guest experience and thematic piece to really bring it to life and being more than just a water slide or a pool?
Absolutely. And that's a great segue to creating this controlled experience. And here we have a few, obviously Disney we would say is very controlled in how they moderate that. And then for those who've been to Labadee in Haiti, which is kind of a legacy port, Royal's first one, Leon, in project management, as you guys are involved very early on site selection, walk us through, how are you advising your clients as you're looking for, what are you guys looking for to say this could be a viable location for these cruise lines to make an investment into?
Yeah, I think it's primarily looking, what kind of hurdles are they going to face? What are the challenges? A lot of these islands, they don't have airports, they don't have ports, so there's a lot of considerations around that. Resources are a big consideration. There's a lot of competition right now in this space, so access to the right vendors is very important. And so I'd say those are the big things that really come to mind. I'd love to hear your opinion, Keith.
You know I always have one, so you shouldn't ask me these questions, Leon. It's a funny piece. So Leon's spot on. There's a lot of intrinsic things that come into local labor and government relations, and how are we going to balance the needs of really incentivizing these local economies and bringing, frankly, what's millions of visitors into their backyard. But really how it all starts is we do heat maps, right? We have home ports. All the cruise destinations have home ports. We have one right here in Port Canaveral. And I look at travel distance, right? So how far am I traveling within a certain amount of time at a certain speed of the cruise ship? Because believe it or not, a lot of these pro formas are based on fuel savings. So not only is it good for the bottom line, but it's awesome for the environment. We're burning less fuels, we're implementing better green technology. And the only way that happens is by running at slower speeds and going at shorter distances. So I do heat maps around all of our home ports to figure out where are great locations to start looking. And then it's back to old technology of getting on an airplane, flying over the island, see we're looking great. We do bathymetric surveys because to be able to bring in these large ships, we have to have a large draft, right? Celebration Key, to take our Ace class ship, we need to be able to have a draft of 13 meters, which is huge. That requires us to go out and dredge out the ocean bottom, which has all sorts of environmental challenges that we want to be mindful of when it comes to coral relocation, making sure that we're not promoting with dredge materials that get into the slip and come down and travel into people's backyards. So it's a whole large piece of, can we find a destination that has beautiful white beaches, has something to do for our shore excursion activities so they can leave the destination they want to for a couple hours to experience these curated, authentic experiences. And is there a way that I can do it without having to dredge? So there's a lot of things that start that initial conversation, and then from there it's years of doing investigation research.
Absolutely. Scott, we're working on some projects together, and I would say that those projects had the program. They knew what they wanted. They knew how many guests they needed to bring there. They didn't know if the land they had made sense for that. So how, as you guys come in from a land planning standpoint and advising the room, how do you challenge that? You have the brand that wants a certain program that meets their pro forma, but do we have the land to make it work? How do you balance that?
Well, there's kind of a couple of different categories we look at with the destinations. As Josh has described and speak about curated experiences, we know what the brand is trying to deliver, the vision, right? Having a strong understanding and a foundation for that is critical to building the identity and really the core of the guest experience. But you have to apply that to the site and understand, the physical aspects of the property that you're working with. And really from a site analysis perspective, begin to, as you define these curated moments, lay those out in a sense that gives you an opportunity to have the appropriate guest flow. We talk a lot about guest choreography when they disembark and the experience that we want them to have as they arrive. Those first critical moments arriving at that destination will set the tone for that experience, and it's incredibly important to get that right. But the one thing that really demands a lot of attention and is often when we spend a lot of our time in our meetings is really talking about operations. The guest wants to experience something that just magically happens, right? They don't necessarily want to know all of the things that happen behind the scenes. So it's so critically important to work hand in hand with the operators to truly understand how the destinations are going to be run. And we're taking a lot of lessons from the theme park world in that to understand how to curate those experiences so that the operations can move seamlessly. There's a lot of folks moving in and out of the destination in a short period of time. There's a lot of turnover of food and beverage, and all of that has to be thought through from loading, unloading, even down to where the garbage cans go and how they're held and dealt with. So you really start at that macro level and to get down into, how do I get a drink when I'm sitting in this curated zone that I'm in?
That's great. That definitely leads to kind of what experiences do these guests expect? Keith, you kind of touched on this earlier, so I'll come back to you. You have a research division. You talk about the various lines. Recently announced that Princess is now going into Celebration Key next year. So now you're taking what was designed, always probably intended, but designed for one brand, now mixing brands that have two different experiences. How did that impact research? How's that impacting some of the decisions that you're making based on looking at now you're mixing these two classes of ship? Companies.
Actually, Cunard's going to be coming as well now, so I don't know.
Carnival will do 11 brands?
We have a ton.
11 plus brands.
So that's recently announced. Cunard's going to be sailing out of Miami for those that like that luxury kind of sophisticated British experience. They'll be sailing to Celebration Key. Look at you, Mr. Jones. So, it's a great point. You'll find with me, I'm kind of an old school guy when it comes to how we design, guest experiences. I like to start with what we call a neutral background, right? And I like things that are crossover, that can be applicable to any brand that we have. And then we add in the kind of fun, the magic on top, right? Those become the layers that then allow us to be curated to whatever brand it is that we're trying to cater to. So as we talked, multi-generation cruisers are becoming a big statement for us. We have mom and dad with the grandkids, and the grandparents want to come along too. So we got to make sure that we're able to service all, where the grandparents don't necessarily want to go to the swim bar and pound a bunch of fruity cocktail drinks. They might, which is cool if they want to, but they want a place where they can hang out with the kids, play on splash pads and spend some time and give mom and dad a break, or do a curated cooking class, or be able to explore authentic food. So we spend a lot of time, and we'll talk about this later, where our big vision with Carnival is looking at the surrounding areas and the islands that we go into, and really trying to find out what makes that tick. So the Bahamas has a huge amount of culture and flair, and we start there. We figure out how can we bring that into these small segments of 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours on an island, where they can get that authentic curated experience again. We'll use that word a lot because it's a great buzzword of food and parades and culture and just dealing with the local people. And we apply that to all brands. So you'll find that within the destinations, there'll be little pockets that work well for everyone.
That's great. Leon, hearing all that sounds great. Your project management, your budget, how are you guys managing that with understanding multiple brands, multiple offerings? Things cost more in these island developments. What do you guys do early in development to try to,
you know, Keith's a dreamer. I know contractor by training has now moved into the creative side. How do you balance all of that? How do you keep us all honest as designers and consultants? What levers are you guys pulling early on?
Yeah, it's really a dynamic balance of trying to encourage program while trying to maintain a budget, and that doesn't always align that well, especially when there's new trends that our clients are seeing, or there's opportunities that come across that may make the venue a little bit better. So it's really just a balance of trying to maintain budget, but really trying to incorporate that program that's necessary to really maximize the experience. And it's not always easy. It's definitely a push and pull. It can be challenging at times.
Are you saying I'm difficult?
I never said that. But
Let the record show.
It's just quickly on that point, because it's a big philosophy that, you know, Leon and I use in a lot of our projects, and I call it, you know, healthy friction, right? We need friction to spark a flame, and it sounds cheesy, but that's really how it boils down. And we try to break it up into our creative department, which is blue sky, come up with crazy ideas. Victoria, I see, like, we butt heads a lot because you want to do crazy shit, excuse my language, which is what we encourage. And then we need Leon to kind of ground things back into what's real in budget. And where the magic happens is, how do we keep that guest intent using means and methods and materials that are on budget and on cost and help us maintain the schedule? And that's where the magic will always be for us.
No, and Scott, I'll kind of ask more of, and we're going to kind of deep dive into these items, but what level from EDSA, I know you're very involved in, you know, UOI, land planning, ASLA, what level of benchmarking are you guys starting to bring to these projects? Are you comparing against other islands, against all-inclusives? What are you guys doing, and how are you bringing that to the table early on?
Well, it's interesting, and I love this slide because it speaks about guest expectations. You know, there is an expectation of the guest when they arrive to the destination, and when we look at, you know, having been fortunate enough to work on hospitality destinations worldwide, we draw on all of that experience because there's so many parallels to how to give that guest an elevated experience, or a fun experience, or a thrilling experience, or a family experience that comes from the resort industry. So we do look at benchmarking against other destinations that are out there in the marketplace for certain. It's always important to understand the comps and to try to find, you know, what's happening next and what are the things that are trending. But oftentimes, you know, we look into our portfolio and the projects that we have on the boards worldwide and say, you know, what is the next thing that's coming down the road? You know, we're going to get into a lot of these different topics, but a simple example of that is multi-generational tourism. You know, this has been around in Asia for a very long time. It's something that is very common in that part of the world as well as the Middle East, and it's really fine. Oh, there's a great segue.
I was like, I went ahead and segue. Go ahead and start this slide.
And it's finding its way, you know, into this destination cruise experience, and it's an important thing to understand that, you know, you look for those historical references where you can see models of success and things that have worked well, and things that have not worked so well, and what can we learn from that as we bring it to these destinations?
Yeah, and so Keith, I'm gonna, as a brand, are you guys planning and programming for today's guest? Or are you starting to plan and program for the guest you're targeting and changing, or both?
Yes.
Okay. How do you identify, obviously the new to cruise market has been huge for the industry. And for those who've never been on a cruise, new to cruise is short weekend sailings. How do I get people who are terrified of going on this giant floating hotel? As Keith said, we're only gonna get you, 60 nautical miles away from land, you'll be fine. And so how have you guys, I mean, Celebration Key is obviously a big new to cruise just because of proximity, but has that been part of the offerings and the targeting?
Yeah, it's a couple of things. I think, Scott hit on it really well. I had a great mentor when I got to the theme park world, and kind of his thing was, yes, we want to be pioneers, we want new, amazing things, but what really works for us as a staple is finding what's been done, tried and tested, and making it better, right? So to your point, this multi-generational has been done in Asia for a while. We just want to make it better, right? So our big piece is if we can get that right for 60-70% of the destination, it gives us a freedom to then start thinking big and pioneering new things, but you have to get the baseline right. So my focus has always been find what everyone else has done really well. We don't need to reinvent the wheel and do it better than they did, right? So getting back to your point, it's a thing that came from Merlin. Merlin was really big on the short breaks, right? To us, that's your weekend vacation, your 2 to 3 day stays. We were missing that piece within our itinerary. You know, you'd find that most of the Carnival cruises were 5 days, 7 days, 8 days to do something that was nice in our larger ships. So when I got involved with Carnival, we started talking around how do we reimagine what's happening, and you know, Royal pioneered it, and we wanted to figure out how do we do it better. So we get into the short break destination, which is you can leave from Miami, do a 3-day weekend cruise, go out and see Celebration Key. Your hotel is the cruise ship, and we have a lot of great curated experiences on the cruise ship itself. I think they sell themselves. And where we were lacking, and I think a lot of the cruise industry was lacking, was you have these peaks and valleys. You know, you get on a cruise ship and you've got Cirque du Soleil and comedy clubs and everything you can possibly imagine. And then you'll get off at a cruise port, and I won't mention names, and it falls flat. You know, you'll get, gosh, I spent an hour, I'll walk around to the straw markets, and I want to get back onto the ship. Where we were missing the point, I think a lot of the cruise industry, is how do we maintain that even keel in terms of experiences? And we can control those at our own private destinations. So we want the island land-based destinations to match what we do on the cruise ships. And since the cruise industry has been doing that, and Royal's been a great pioneer, and thanks for leading the way, we find that it feels more relatable and comfortable to what people already experience in, you know, the theme parks here in Orlando. So we're a direct comparison of, you can go out and experience wonderful new destinations and still have that curated theme park experience because we're giving it to you on land and on the cruise ship itself. I think that's been a real game changer for our industry.
Yeah, and in the industry, there's just been a trend. Royal Carnival's not doing this. Used to be your oldest ships became your shortest sailing ships. And a few years ago, Royal launched a brand new ship on weekend sailings, which had never been done in the industry. These are billion-dollar investments, and you want to maximize revenue, but what they're finding is, I know Carnival's seeing this, I know NCL's now seeing this, is you're giving these brand new cruisers the best punch you can throw out the gate, and now they want to come back and they want to experience more, and you're hooking them for that. Well, if it's this good in 3 days, how's it going to be in 5 to 8 days? It's going to be that much better. And so I think that's been this big, with all these island developments doing that. Norwegian just announced they're upgrading GSC, which is their island, and probably late to the game as they're doing that, and they're now investing that, and so we're seeing this arms race continue. Lee, and I'm going to run to relaxing a little bit. We joked on our pre-call, you know, every beach you go to, all these islands, they're ready for a cabana, right? There's nothing you have to do. It's perfect white sand. You just come in, drop the cabana. People love the experience. That's how the construction goes, right?
It's an absolute piece of cake. It's so simple. Not so much. There's obviously a lot of dynamics that come into play. First of all, a lot of these venues are still running ship calls, so there's guests on the island. So really being thoughtful of how you plan for logistics and plan for construction in areas, I think that's a big component. Another component is really trying to make these, let's use cabanas as an example, trying to make them prototypical, easy to replicate, while still keeping that authentic feel to it. So, we have projects that have 100 structures that it might be easiest to look at a modular option that can go up quick, still has that authentic feel to it, but it's easy to maintain and easy to construct.
Yeah, and I'm going to throw Scott real quick. I'll come back to you. Scott, we talk a lot in our design about artificial authentic.
Right.
And so, which is how do we, I guess, we're creating someone's vision of what they think they're going to get as authentic. It's the eye of the beholder. It's,
That's right.
Authentic Mexico may not be what guests going to Mexico are expecting. So
Right.
how do we design?
Well, it's we think about storytelling and placemaking and design, and Josh is right. When we talk about authenticity, we're really trying to deliver on the guest expectation. And that's going to vary within the different market segmentations that exist. We'll talk a little bit more about exclusivity, what some of the expectations are around that. But when folks want to come and have a great experience, we want to be able to deliver on that. So we look at the site to really try to understand, how do we curate that? How do we choreograph that movement through the site, whether it be through the food and beverage that's served, whether it be through the music, whether it be through the vistas and the destinations that they could see, to make it simple for guests to really become into an immersive environment. And that's really the goal. You want to bring them off the cruise ship and really just deliver on the promise when they booked this that they had in their mind of what they want to experience. Some folks really want to just find that quiet cabana and be able to get a little peace and quiet and listen to the waves, where other folks really want to go to the pool with the DJ and really see everything that's happening. So we see parallels in that in the world of hospitality. And I go back to the late 90s when we were just starting to work on all the Atlantis projects worldwide, and the Bahamas was the first one. It was defined with really distinct rooms, right? You had areas within the zones, and that parallels very much to what we're doing on the landside destinations and the cruise to cater to those different expectations of guests. And then you use the interconnective ways, the shoulder experiences to do that storytelling. And doing some work for Disney a few years back, I heard a great quote from one of the Imagineers that we worked with that talked about the memories are made on those shoulder moments. And so we put a lot of emphasis on that journey part of the aspect because it really is the opportunity to begin that storytelling and set the tone for all of the destinations has to offer.
Oh, yeah. I'll be quick, so I think we're running long.
Okay.
Yeah, just two things. So going back to what Leon was talking around, guests show up and they see these beautiful, wonderful guest experiences. They don't realize what actually has to go into the ground, as I call it, that never really gets a return for investment on. So we'll give you the example. We're working on a project in Half Moon Key together now. That island is desolate. It's in the middle of nowhere, which is why it has an appeal. It's beautiful, but we need to be able to welcome 13, 14,000 guests a day. I mean, that's a lot of toilet flushes. That's a lot of water that we have to produce. We have to generate the power. None of that exists. So the amount of work that goes into building these back-of-house facilities, there are many cities, right, just to be able to curate the experience for all the guests on island. So to me, that's a big challenge. It takes a lot of forward thinking and planning to make sure that it's seamless for the guests to get off. Talking back on authentic, because I'm big on this. This is one of our big pillars that we look at with Carnival. We take it a step further. We really look at, yes, we want to curate these experiences between, the restaurants and the bars, but we take it to the next level. We do a lot of market research into the destinations that we're going to. We want to source local materials. Like we're working in Mahogany Bay at one of our other ports and destinations. And we want to make sure that we're utilizing Honduran limestone, and Honduran mahogany wood. We want to make sure that we visit the local bazaars and see what they do with their basket bazaars. What colors are they using? What materials? How do we integrate that into our pop-up straw markets and things, so guests not only can have their curated piece, but also a taste of authenticity on the island. So I think that's very important of how we recognize and stay very true to the cultures that we're blessed to build these destinations on.
No, that's great.
Yeah, I would say one more thing too that I've seen is from the authenticity approach is the way that Carnival's hiring locals, setting up straw markets on the venue, things like junk new bands. They're really investing on the operations side to even further reinforce that authentic experience.
So as we advance from relaxing, we'll get to thrilling. Obviously, all of these destinations are including some level of thrill. Some are full water parks, some are elements of slides. We see zip lines in places like Labadee. Really to the group, how do you guys target what level of thrill? I have our own experiences, what we've done in water parks, but how do you guys see that? And then are you benchmarking against cruise lines, theme parks, other all-inclusives, all the above? Like, what metrics are you guys seeing that we need to add this level of thrill?
Me? Oh yeah.
All right.
I'm not shy to talk, Josh. So, yeah, all the above. I think what you'll find with us is every destination requires something different. So if we go back to the storytelling and placemaking, some destinations aren't going to be fit for a roller coaster. It doesn't work into what happens on the local destination. They might be more attuned to a ropes course or high adventure. Think of Excellent Park. That might be the comparable of thrilling natural adventure that guests are wanting to experience. So it's really going to be destination based on what we want to do. Once we land on how we can blend thrills and attractions with the local destination, Then it comes back to your point, benchmarking. And we benchmark against the Middle East, against China, against other cruise lines. It's not specific just to our competitors, because again, we're looking at who does it well and wanting to do it better.
I would add, when guests come to these types of destinations, I mean, they're really here to make memories, right? And we're trying to provide the framework and the backdrop for that. And it could be called the Instagrammable moment, or that moment that everybody takes away, where there was that one thing that really elevated the experience that everyone goes home talking about. And that's truly what we're driving for. And it means a lot of different things. To my kids, it might be going down the tallest water slide. But to my parents, it might be an amazing boardwalk through a mangrove, right? And everybody has their own definition of what thrilling is and how that experience is. But it's important to understand that that's part of the formula, that you want to deliver these moments and curate those around the destination so that you have a reason to explore, extend the stay, really look at the opportunity to, have somebody come and not just plop themselves in a lounge chairs, but truly immerse themselves in the environment and see all that there is to offer.
And I'll add, as someone who's designed a lot of these water parks for these islands, you would be shocked at the metrics that the cruise lines have of how many shore excursions they sell pre-cruise, while on the cruise. So I know that impacts it, where you're not trying to take money away from the local operators. Most of these projects, if you go on a zip line excursion in Honduras with a partner, the cruise line is probably an investment in that partner, because they want those locals to survive and thrive. And so we see that, it saw some metrics many years ago of how many people actually bought day passes to Atlantis' water park in the Bahamas. I was like, this thing hasn't been updated in like 20 years, and this many people still go? So it was very interesting, and so I think it's not shocking to see on this slide, you've got, Carnival, Royal, Norwegian, all with water parks, all with slides. Obviously the goal is not to just be a water park that you buy a ticket to, it's how you do that authentic with it. We'll transition to exclusivity, keep us moving. So obviously every ship has classes. You have suites, you have ultra suites, you have basic staterooms, you have interior staterooms, sometimes below the water, all those things. Keith, how important is it to have these VIP experiences? And I guess the follow-up on that is, do you see people who aren't in suites, reaching for that brass ring on the island to get that exclusivity, and they choose to now invest their money that way, if you all have those?
Yeah, I think, with everything we want to present tiers, right? We need to be everything for as many people as we can. So what you'll find is our offerings, like the Beach Club, we have different tiers within that. So people who, to your point, might want to have an interior cabin, they can splurge and go have an experience at the Beach Club where they're going to be limited to being around 500 people versus 13,000, right? And it comes with food and drinks and a DJ, and it's curated. We find a lot of people will do that. They'll plan their cruise out that says, on a budget, I want to save money here, but we're going to go all out when we get to Pearl Cove. So it's very important for us, not only for the metrics in terms of revenue drive, but for giving guests the opportunity to experience the islands the way that they choose.
Do you see, as you mentioned, you're bringing in these exclusive premium lines out there, Silver Sea or Princess, or even now MSC has their Explorer line, which is ultra luxury. Do you see a trend where these exclusives would even want their own island or their own pier, and do you think that we're heading in that route? And kind of, I'll look at like the Sixth Sense or a lot of the Red Sea stuff. What do you see from your guest profile right now?
Yeah, you'll see it just, we talked earlier, Canard, which is a luxury brand for us. They want to call it Celebration Key. Princess is now calling it Celebration Key. I think that you'll find if we have a destination that's corporately owned, that we can control the environment, control the experiences, it's better off for all of our guests if we have zones and areas for them to enjoy what they have. So I think you'll find this trend continue on with us. As of now, we're not going to build a dedicated pier for Seabourn. They just don't do enough volume to justify what the investment cost is, but it doesn't mean that they won't call at some of our ports.
I've got kind of two thoughts around this subject. Number one, whenever we talk about exclusivity, we always want to ground ourselves and remember that this is someone's best experience, right? And whether you're in the lower tier experience or you're really shooting for that high end of exclusivity, so we want to deliver for each and every one of the guests. And that's an important core principle when you look at how you plan and design these things. The second kind of angle to that, and this is really where we look at some of the strong parallels that are coming in the global hospitality market, is this segment of the market is climbing, and it is continuing, and we could talk about the statistics of the transfer of wealth from the baby boomers down to a generation that are willing to spend that capital, but they're willing to spend it on exclusivity and experiences. And that's what we're seeing in the hotel world. And it's a tremendous amount of focus. That is the highest growth sector in the hospitality industry right now. And it's beginning to drift over. Where the Ritz-Carlton was blending into this space. The Four Seasons is blending into this space. Amman is blending into this space. There's more to come, and I think we're going to see a trend of that shifting that's going to parallel a lot of what's happening in land-based destinations.
I mean, Scott hit the nail on the head. You'll look at like our luxury brands with Seabourn. If you still compare it to the land-based equivalent, the value for money is tremendous. They've got 4 Michelin-star restaurants on their ship.
Yeah.
It's a real opera singer that comes in from Milan, Paris to sing. I mean, it's Italy is. It's phenomenal the quality that you'll get on some of these luxury cruise lines and the value that you pay for it. And I think that's really what's driving this push.
And your discount code work for those cruise lines?
For you, yes, it does.
We were talking about authenticity, and this is really where those parallels really come in, because the guest that's going to be targeting that Michelin star experience is truly looking for the authentic experience, right? They're not, necessarily, they may want to take the kid to the thrill slide for a little bit, but mom and dad really want to go find that authentic meal that was curated and prepared locally by a world-renowned chef that can deliver on the experience that they have. So there's a strong parallel to that, and I think the other piece, which I was really excited to hear you touch on, is the environmental aspect of this. There's also a strong comparison to, we call them the eco-resort destinations, and just more thought toward resiliency and sustainability around these destinations that really is demanded in this market, that we will see the trends continue to cater to.
Well, Scott stepped on my next slide, as we'll talk about this. No, Scott, that was great. I know we talked about that. I'm gonna go a little out of order of our notes here. Keith, can you talk about, Celebration Key was such a great partnership with the locals. That's something that you guys have really beat the drum on and talked about. Can you just talk about that being a core tenet of going into this location? I love what you said about Honduras and sourcing materials, but with Celebration Key, for those of you guys who don't know, Freeport ravaged by a hurricane many years ago, and it's kind of just been an island that was kind of just forgotten a little bit and needed this bolt of energy.
Yeah, I mean, it was our kind of mantra for a while. So Hurricane Dorian just came and destroyed the entire island. So all commerce left, and we had a huge exodus of population on the island. More than half left to other places because they needed to find work to feed their families. So we really kind of pioneered this mantra of bringing people back home to Freeport and Grand Bahama, and we were successful. We on the construction side, we employed 1,500, 1,600 individuals, of which 90% were Bahamian, of which 60% were people coming back to their home island of Freeport, which is just a huge testament. We hired 21 different general contractors to deliver this project, of which 19 were local Grand Bahama contractors. I mean, there's a learning curve, Leon will tell you, of getting people up to speed, and it is. We looked at, it's worth the challenges and the heartache to be able to train the local vendor population to help us not only in the future, but to help them long term. So we set up training programs. We taught them about health and safety. We provided tools and machineries for them, to really help bolster the economy. And it's the right thing to do, even if it costs more money for these islands, because we're stewards in their backyard. We want to be good. Same thing on the operations side. We've got 1,500 people, of which 98% are local Bahamians. We brought lots of people back again to Freeport that had left to gone and explored jobs in other islands. So all the way down to our shore excursion vendors that are outside of Celebration Key. So our economic impact is massive if you look at it. We're going to bring in our millionth visitor sometime to Celebration Key this year, which is huge considering we opened in July. So think about that amount of people being brought to an island whose population was like 30,000 people. It's unreal.
Yeah.
One thing to say, just maybe on more of a personal side, is I remember prior to the construction starting, I remember us going to grab a drink before a flight, and the locals there were very cautiously optimistic and because of what was at stake. And I remember we had a conversation with the bartender about it, and then fast forward in the construction phase, to Keith's point, the majority of the workers on site were Bahamian, and while they didn't have that level of sophistication or experience with construction, they definitely had a great attitude to try and learn and listen. And so I really appreciated just walking around the site and having conversations with these folks, and they really wanted to learn, they really wanted to sharpen their craft, but they just needed somebody to kind of guide them along. So it was a great experience from that perspective.
I love that story because we've talked about the expectation around this authentic experience, but how do you get there? And part of it is becoming a student in the environment. Whether you're talking to the bartender or you're doing deep research of the destinations that you're developing in, to really understand what is the story, what's the backstory, what's the environmental narrative, what's the cultural narrative, and how do you then bring that to bear in the destination? And for us, that's one of the most exciting parts of the job, especially getting to work globally. You learn so much about all these different cultures and the nuances. And when you're able to find those little kernels of information and bring that to your guests and highlight it through the storytelling of place, it really is a magical moment and a great opportunity. But it doesn't happen automatically. It's not something you get through ChatGPT or Google it. This is about boots on the ground, and we always tell our team, don't take the guided tour. You go on a site visit, you're going to see things, like figure out what's in that hut over there and what are those folks up to, and go talk to them and learn what you can learn. Early part of my career, I did a lot of work in Asia, and I learned more in the villages and in the mountains, talking to some of the folks around the places that we were working about the culture in which we were working with than our client even knew. And I think that's an important part, because when you're able to, through the design process and working with the owner and the team, the management team, you're able to kind of be that voice at the table from the design side and say, hey, here's how we can infuse this into the story. Not always about budget. Sometimes it's just about being thoughtful of the place that you're working in.
That's great. As we're kind of getting close to our wrapping up on time, I know we talked about Celebration Key early on. You guys got to see a video. This is a early site plan. We kind of pulled a bubble, but in kind of what we've talked about, these pillars of guest experience and planning, you talked through the site plan earlier, but how important was it, not just with this day one arrival, but understanding, I'll point, it didn't make a lot of sense that, we split the basins in two. You kind of walk right through the Sun Castle, which quite frankly didn't exist on the site early on. Keith came to the project, he's like, I have this idea. And so, but how important was that to get people to the retail shopping? Because really it was about getting people to meet those locals and kind of talk about how that was a part of Celebration Key's planning as we move to wrap up.
I mean, Scott will appreciate it, but guest flow is very important to us. How do we get guests distributed properly so we're not slamming venues and making sure that there's enough wow to get people to different parts of the destination itself? So the Sun Castle, again, my big thing, and I guess I'm older now, I used to call it the Instagram moment, maybe it's the TikTok moment now, but what is that piece that people will instantly recognize and say, that's Celebration Key? And that's where the Sun Castle came from. And to your point, it allowed us to get people right into Lacona's Cove, which becomes a hub to distribute to either zone. So when we do these master planning concepts, we really start with a bubble diagram, more of what we want guests to experience first versus what the venues really are. So we start with, explore, celebrate, dine or entertainment. And we look at how we want those to balance out on the site plan itself, and then the venues start to develop past that. So that's kind of how we work through the site plan with the Celebration Key. You were right, the Sun Castle was instrumental because it was iconic and allowed us to really split the site up and distribute it better.
These are just some stats about Celebration Key, just so those of you that may be unaware, and I know Keith has mentioned this throughout the presentation. I guess, Keith, I'll ask you this. In the first 120 days or so of operation, what has shocked you? What did you guys, as you turned it over, what has come back that you just like, man, we never thought that would happen?
Gosh, that's a great question. I think we are blown away by how high the KPIs have been since day one. You know, it's a testament to the local Bahamian operators. They bring the joy and the fun that really has impressed our guests. So, you know, I think that was worth the time and investment to really make sure that we've curated and trained the local workforce, because the energy and the love that they bring really wears off on our guests. I think the biggest thing for me, and those who've opened up new theme parks, it's always clunky in the first couple months, right? You're kind of figuring out your way, how we have long queues, we have long waits in restaurants, the food quality might not be there. Touch wood, we didn't have those. We had a really good lead up operational ramp up, and our KPIs have been through the roof. So I think that's what's really surprised me, is that early doors were really wowing guests.
That's great. Leon, anything differently you guys wish you would have done in construction, that where you were like, we're gonna go this route, and then you pivoted? I won't point, I know some other things I won't bring up.
We might need another hour for this.
Okay.
And I might need some couch time, so yeah. Yeah, seriously though, I think some of the major lessons learned, and we touched on some of it, with just really understanding the resources that we had available on island, what qualified resources we had. I think we had some misfires with some of the vendors we did hire. But I'd say more importantly, I've thought about this, and looking at our team as a whole, I think there is a very unique profile of individual that can be successful on these types of projects. And what I mean by that is it's a little more gritty, it's a little more field-focused mentoring and coaching versus just sticking to the contract. It's really trying to encourage these people to be successful and to get the job done, and it really takes that strong emotional intelligence and critical thinking to how to compel people to do that in a creative way. So I think that was the biggest lesson learned for me.
Great. So as we get, closing thoughts, and Keith, I'll kind of start with you. What do you think's next for the cruise destination experience? Without giving away maybe what you're working on, but we highlighted super luxury. Are we going full adventure theme park? More curated cultural? Is there something else? What are you seeing as kind of a closing thought of where you think this, what is actually 30-year-old kind of industry, really going in its kind of new evolution?
I think all the above, right? So if you look at what we're trying to accomplish, and our CEO is brilliant when he talks around this, is, yes, we're in competition with Royal, yes, we're in competition with Norwegian MSC, but we're really not, right? We're kind of pioneering this market together to help each other raise the profile of what cruising means. We're really in competition with land-based vacations, right? And if you look at that marketplace as a whole, between Orlando, LA, Vegas, it's a huge nut to be able to tap into. So what we're really trying to compete with is that. So I'll give you the example, and this ties into all of this, is how do I convince a family of 4 to come do a short cruise with me instead of going to Volcano Bay or to Universal? We need to be able to offer similar-esque experiences where they say, I want to do my short break weekend on a Carnival cruise versus coming down and spending a weekend at Universal. Or vice versa, I want to tap into that luxury Michelin star dining that you get at Vegas without having to spend a weekend in Vegas. I can do it on a cruise ship. So for us, that's really where we're focusing on how do we siphon off some of the visitation from land-based.
That's great. Scott?
The thing that occurs to me when we look ahead of what could be coming down the pipeline is, I think about the investment that is happening in these landside destinations, and you're right, and no pun intended, but like a rising tide raises all ships here, right? And that is happening globally. And so we think about some of these destinations, and where are we going to get to a point where we're going to start seeing multi-day stops, right? And how does that influence programming? Or are we going to see nightlife come into play? When you look at some of the markets that are maybe not so built around the infrastructure that we have today, where you can only be 60 miles from a destination if you're in the Red Sea per se, or somewhere in a longer end destination in the South Pacific, where you might be looking at a different dynamic. And how is is that going to influence, and then come back to teach us some lessons that they've learned that will then later come to apply. The other piece of this too is really, when you're doing the planning, is to think about what could be coming next. And like any good design, there's always that thought before phasing, and being able to allocate for that wonderful attraction, or maybe that new thrill thing that hasn't been developed yet, but we know will come online, and down the road we're going to want to plus our experience around that. I think there's been a lot more thought put into the planning of these destinations for how they will live and grow over time, and I think that's an incredibly important aspect of this.
Leon?
I think Scott nailed it, so I don't have anything else.
So, well, I will leave the group with kind of one tidbit. This is a 2020 number right before COVID, so it's a little off, but there are presently more cruise ships that are contracted or under construction of the major European shipyards destined for the Caribbean than are currently sailing in the Caribbean. So when we think about what this experiential design is going to be and what we see in the market, we go back to that map that we showed earlier, there's got to be places for them to go. And so that's what we see, and we're seeing evolution of ports being bought by people, ports being taken over, more people taking all of that. So I want to thank everybody for coming. This has been our panel. We have time for a couple questions. I have to repeat the question if you have a microphone, and then our panel will be able to answer it. Do you have any questions real quick? This hand went up back there first, I believe.
So you guys there's been a lot of these experiential things created across the Caribbean. How do you make sure you don't end up in a position similar to what Vegas is dealing with now, where they kind of price themselves out, where there's so much going on? We're having this huge boom in cruising right now, which is fantastic. What happens if that tapers off with all of the new ships, with all these massive things being created? How does it, what if it doesn't keep up? What's the plan?
It's a great question. You'll find with us, and I think with our competitors, is we are very capital conscious, right? Whereas Vegas itself is a small location, right? Where you have big competing interests that are really more around gaming than what I would call experience, right? So there's a different dynamic where Vegas is true, ROI is getting people to spend money at the casinos. The experience is a second thought, right? And what they're losing is that gambler and people coming out to experience the experience, which is overinflated itself. So if we really look at it on a like-for-like basis, and we talked about this earlier, well, the cruise industry is a value for money, a very strong value for money. Even if we were to increase our prices by 40%, we're still well under any of the land-based destinations. So it's that conscious approach of not over-investing, not over-monetizing what we think our capacity is within the cruise ships, and being very conscious with our debt and capital.
And I'll add to that from our work, you actually can move your ship to a different port. You have the ability, there are so many untapped ports. I'll highlight that I've had conversations with cruise lines, if you look at Jacksonville, Florida, they have some bridges so you can't get mega ships in there, but if you look at the access of that market and the new people that you open up, there are so many drive-to destinations. If I can hop in a car, we were talking before, the Houston area, blowing up population-wise, Port of Galveston, every cruise line's made massive investments into that because that is all new markets. So when we talk about the Caribbean, we're also talking about, the Gulf of Mexico, we're talking that whole area, that's kind of all looked at the same.
I mean, Josh hit the nail on the head, and it's important to note, MSC, Norwegian, or European-based cruise lines, they've had a lull in the European market. So what have they done? They've relocated their ships to where the market is strong. So because they are portable destinations, we do insulate ourselves unless there's another big catastrophic event that's outside of our control.
And I'll give a shout out to all the cruise lines. For those of you not in the room, they got zero government bailout. They kept all of their ships running. I've learned all of this. And you can't turn a ship off. If you turn the engines off and it's not sailing, it is 6 to 9 months to bring that and recommission it through the CDC. So Carnival, Royal, Norwegian, all parked them out in the Caribbean and had skeleton crews of 20 people running these massive ships because they never knew when they were going to come back. And it's a testament to the industry that not only to come back, it's probably stronger than it's ever been, and that's just been great. So, yes, sir.
So, with the rise of these private destinations, what you're seeing with the new destinations is you have more regulation and taxation by the home countries. Like Labadee was the wild, wild west, a lot of the early ones, but now you're getting, the drink package doesn't work on the islands and stuff like that. How do you think that impacts the experience when you're purchasing food and you're paying the tax in these countries that are normally cash intensive, and you're not paying the tax? Like when you pay a taxi driver, you're just giving them $20 in cash. That's making people want to stay on the ship, personally, me.
Yeah, I mean, it's anywhere we go. We're blessed that we travel all over the world through the theme park industry, and Europe has all sorts of tax. And there's climate tax and this tax, and we pay VAT to operate in these countries. It's just part of making sure that the infrastructure in the local countries that we develop stays consistent. Because the worst thing we could do is have a collapse, right? Because we're underfunding the infrastructure and the government needs. So it's just a balance, and I think that we'll find that most of our guests understand the ebb and flow of the economics of the political culture, and it's gonna happen. We can't control it, right? We are sensible. We try to minimize what that amount of quote unquote VAT or impact is passed on to our guests. We have a whole team that all they do is government relations. We are in talking to prime ministers at every country, literally every day, in terms of how do we coexist without biting the hand that feeds us, so to speak.
And I'll add, I think if you look at what happened in Mexico recently, one of the elected officials ran on, I'm going to tax the cruise lines 12x of what the normal port tax was. The cruise lines had a choice. They can pull their ships out, they can move on, and that will impact the economy in a much more negative way. So it is a very collaborative approach. I think when you look at these islands, the goal, and we see it, the goal for a local workforce is the value add. It's not so much paying a tax that goes to the magical government to build a road. It's I'm providing jobs that do not exist. And I think that's a huge testament to what these destinations are. We're working on some right now, and they've literally said it has to be 95% local. You can't bring people off the ship like you could do in Labadee. So they are changing that mentality to help their economy. That's that collaborative process. We are out of time. So with that, thank you guys very much for coming to our panel today. We thank you. We'll be up here to answer any questions you have. Thank you very much.
All right, very interesting press conference there. A lot of stuff was known, but I had to ask a question in the end about taxes, because personally myself, if I'm going to go on an island, the private island, and I have to pay for a drink package, and I have to pay sales tax on that drink package or that excursion, well, I'm just going to stay on the boat. I think one of the most interesting things we learned is these new islands they're working on, these new destinations they're working on, which if you've listened to the press conference, there's more ships being built for the Caribbean than in the Caribbean, so they have to build these islands. Some of these islands, out islands, private destinations are requiring 95% local workers. That's going to make the situation even worse. As I predicted on this channel a couple of months ago, I said, drinking on these private islands is going away. You know why? Because you're taking money away from the local economy. So I expect more tax and less drink packages to work on the islands. And I think we just learned about that from the private destination experience. This is Richard from No Pants Profits, hoping you enjoyed that little look at private destinations and reminding you that when you wear no shirt, when you wear no pants, all you get left to lose is your shirt. Bye.